Okay, so I've thought about how to make this video in a way that actually says something other than I'm kind of dumb. But I think it's about sharing information. I think that's the crux of this video. So I really like Python, and I want to learn Python really in depth. I've pretty much done everything that I can with the normal Python language, and I want to go a step further and start writing C extensions. I mean, NumPy, PyTorch, TensorFlow, all of those guys have been revolutionary in the Python space. I mean, the whole reason why machine learning is so big is because of those libraries. It's just stupidly easy to create a machine learning model in Python. And of course, if these packages were written in pure Python, it would just be terrible because Python is slow for things like addition. And that's because everything in Python is an object stored on the heap. And there's no possible optimization that the stock CPython interpreter can do to optimize those operations. Now with PyPy, it can um, use just-in-time compilation to actually treat integers like integers, but that's not the point of this video. The reason why NumPy, PyTorch, and TensorFlow can actually be so performant is because their backends are written in uh, for those guys. It's usually like C, C++, and Fortran, which are all compiled languages that, of course, can treat numbers like numbers, and they don't store integers on the heap. Those packages are basically just APIs for the backend written in better, faster programming language. Um, and if you look at the source code for those packages, they're written by people that really know what they're doing. And those people generally don't write code that doesn't work. And when they do write code that doesn't work, they probably know someone. They can probably just text someone and say, hey, I got this error. What do I do? And they get it solved that way. They don't need to make a thread on Stack Overflow or ask a question on Reddit like a normal dev would need to. I mean, if someone has an issue with Python code, they can just Google the error and they get results that mean something. And so far, with a bunch of the errors that I've gotten, I Google the source, like the exact error, the same way that I've done with every other error that I've ever gotten. In Python and C and Fortran, I write a lot of shitty code. I get a lot of errors. I have to spend a lot of time debugging. And with the errors that I got trying to write C extensions, I would get nothing useful. And that's because I'm an average developer. I'm an average guy trying to do something that people a lot smarter than me do, and they do correctly the first time. So it's kind of been a nightmare trying to learn this stuff. And the documentation on the C API in Python is well written. I mean, the entire Python documentation is very well written. It's very clear. But even then, I mean, there's only so far that documentation can get a guy. I mean, eventually, a person that wants to learn how to do something, they just have to do it. They have to put their hands on the keys and just go for it. And yeah, I went for it, and it sucked. So let me break down the timeline. So if anyone wants to write a C extension, they have to do two things first. They have to include a little idiom called pound define py-size t clean. I don't know what it does. It defines a very important thing the compiler needs to know. See, this is why the errors that I get um, are basically not a thing on Google, because I don't know what pound define size-t clean. It actually does. But you can't forget it. And thankfully, I didn't forget it, because I was told to include it in the documentation and every tutorial that I have found. And I will speak about tutorials in a minute. The second thing you have to do, and the thing that made the very first part of my experience especially terrible, is pound include python.h. And the way you do the pound include is with why don't I know what those things are called? The shark symbols, or less than and greater than. Basically the thing where if you have a file, like a pound include file written in these guys, it tells the compiler that this is like a fundamental file. Like the compiler will always know where stdlib is, or stdio, but the compiler did not know where python.h was. And potentially that's because I always have a cursed Python installation. I don't know what it is because I always follow the directions. And if I was a better video editor, I'm just going to put a dunce cap on my head. Imagine there's a dunce cap on here. Anyway, I, for the first time, finally got my Python path correctly in an environmental variable on Windows. And I don't even know why it worked, because I did the same thing I did every other time I tried to set the Python path on my system. Finally worked. First time in a decade. I'm not even kidding. So maybe it's just something special about this laptop. Anyway, I figured because I finally got the Python path right, and I can go to PowerShell, type in Python, and it doesn't open the Windows Store. I don't know why Microsoft does that, especially since they like own the Python Foundation. Like just ship Python on Windows. Like just do it. That's beside the point. I figured GCC, which is another issue that I'll talk about, would know where python.h is, and it didn't. So I go online and I learn how to give it the right commands on the command line to find python.h, the include, and the library for the linker. And yeah, in the few tutorials that I found that use GCC, let alone GCC on Windows, and I should have known this. They don't tell you the command line arguments that you need to have to make a PYD file so you can actually use your C extension in Windows. And I only learned what those commands were about 2 minutes before making this video. And of course, that's because I wanted to go back and redo the command line functions to reproduce some of the errors for this video, and I recognized one. It was the undefined reference to winmain, which means that it thinks that you're writing a regular piece of C code, that you're going to have something that has int main return 0 somewhere in there, and I wasn't. I was trying to write code that makes a shared object in the form of a .pyd file. And I figured because none of the other tutorials that I looked at that use GCC on Windows had that, you know, it was just something wrong with my system. No, it was me. And I think those were just bad tutorials. Because, like, the point of writing a C extension is to have a shared object file that you can import from Python. Those guys didn't. So, yeah, I think those were just bad tutorials that I was following. Because, once again, the people that are writing C extensions don't need tutorials. They need to know what functions are available in the documentation, and then they just do it. So yeah, um, since I couldn't get GCC to work, I finally go to a resource that had been available the whole time, Visual Studio. I hate Visual Studio. For me, the only editor that I have ever liked using that was not just a text editor and the command line is Spider. I really, really like Spider. And it's honestly kind of the worst Python interpreter there is. But it's the one I like, and it's the one that I'm always going to use for Python. I have never liked Visual Studio. For me, the interface is just incredibly overwhelming. There are so many options, there are so many menus and things that you have to configure to even get it to run your code. I want to press a button or hit enter and it just go. I don't want to have to fill out a menu with a million options. And the reason why Visual Studio, and I'm not talking about Visual Studio Code, which I hate for other reasons that I'm not going to get into here. Um, the reason why Visual Studio has so many ridiculous options and so many nested menus and so many panes and things and just stuff going on is that it's for serious programmers that really know what they're doing, that need to write serious code that does stuff. It's not for the guy that just wants to learn how to do something for his own edification. It's not for people like me. But anyway, Microsoft had a tutorial on how to write a C extension in C++ using Visual Studio. So I follow it, and it works. And I was really mad about it. I was really mad because I didn't want to have to rely on Visual Studio to make a C extension. But up until right before making this video, I resigned to the fact that yes, I am going to have to use Visual Studio. And once again, the compiler that Visual Studio uses is MSVC. And if you go online and you search for how to compile a C extension in Python on Windows, there will be people that tell you the command line argument to use for MSVC. MSVC. I really hate that name. Um, and I think this just comes down to a curse. There's something fundamentally wrong with how Visual Studio is set up and configured on my system. Every time that I tried the command line way to compile a C extension, I would basically get an error that said, you're trying to compile for 64-bit and I'm 32-bit. And I would go into command prompt and I would type where CL to know which interpreter it's choosing, because even though I have 64-bit Visual Studio, everything 64-bit on my system, I have a 64-bit computer because I'm living in 2025 and 64-bit is just what there is. For some reason, it's using the 32-bit interpreter for the default. I don't know how to change that. So I just told it to use the exact 64-bit interpreter that I needed. So I give it the exact path for the 64-bit interpreter for my code, and it says, I'm 64-bit and your target is 32-bit. No. No, it wasn't. The only thing I changed was the interpreter that I used. So, okay, by that point, I knew GCC on the command line isn't an option. MSVC on the command line isn't an option either. So I had to use Visual Studio. And on Visual Studio, in one of their incredibly dense, convoluted menus, they give you the exact options that you need to give it the linker and the include things, and they let you change the debug level to match your version of Python. And once again, because there are no good tutorials, when I moved on from the Microsoft tutorial and I thought, okay, I have something that works, I can just write my own code now. I go into Visual Studio, and you always have to make a project in Visual Studio. You can't just open a file. They always want you to make a project if you actually want Visual Studio to do its thing. You can make just a file, but it really doesn't want to let you do that. It doesn't want to let you do that because it's made for people that need projects. They don't need a file. They need something that's manageable, that's configurable, where you can have a bunch of templates that you use. They want things that are like compostable and inheritable, and I don't need any of that. So I decided I will surrender myself to the design patterns of Visual Studio, and I'll just use their boilerplate code for writing a Python C extension because they do have a template for that. Because, once again, Microsoft doesn't make anything easy. You have to install a bunch of stuff to get any of this to work in Visual Studio. And one of those is the native Python development libraries. And I installed that. And a notable thing that they leave out, just automatically, you have to opt in, is downloading Python 3.9 because Python 3.9 is now out of support. This is important because if you choose the default template for a Python C extension in Visual Studio, it assumes that you are using Python 3.9. So I learned this because I wrote my own C code. I knew it was correct because I followed the documentation to a T. I knew it was correct, and I went to build my solution. They don't call it running code, they call it building a solution. Because why would they call it something normal? So I built my solution and I got a bunch of errors, even though I knew it had all the right libraries, all the right includes, the right debugging level, the right bit configuration. It was set to 64-bit because I have a 64-bit system because I am living in 2025. It said, yeah, that whole like PyDecref, PyIncref, literally every macro that I needed to make my C extension work. It was like, no, this isn't a thing actually. And I Google the errors that I was getting. Nothing. I Google more errors. Nothing. And then I can't remember what prompted me to do this. But I look in the project settings, the configuration, and I see Python 3.9. And I change it to Python 3.13. And then it built. But that actually didn't help much. For a reason that I still just fundamentally don't understand. Um, Online, you'll probably see people do like pip install dot when they're writing a C extension, and that'll tell pip to build the library, which I didn't know that pip could build libraries, but it does, because pip apparently has an honest to goodness compiler in it. Cool. Which is once again why making C extensions has been so miserable for me, because the people writing C extensions are serious programmers and they know all that stuff. So yeah, I go to the directory that I have my Visual Studio project in, and I tell pip install star. I make the toml, I make the setup.py, I give pip everything that it needs to do its thing. And basically I got the same old error that, hey, your target's 64-bit, I'm 32-bit. Sorry. I wanted to expire right on the spot. I wanted to turn to dust. I did not want to be on this mortal plane anymore. I was so done. And I knew that the code that I had worked because Visual Studio built it. Visual Studio does not build things it does not think should be built. It doesn't. It won't. It can't because it was made by Microsoft. It was made by serious programmers that do serious programming. And if Visual Studio says that something can be built, that means that code is correct. Go ahead and imagine a dunce cap on my head if I'm speaking out of my ass, because I probably am. But the way that I see it, if Visual Studio says that my code is good, my code is good. So that means I should be able to pip install star. And I figured if Visual Studio is going to think that I'm using Python 3.9, then there's something else that isn't getting the configuration for my system correctly, even though in the configuration, in the endlessly complicated configuration menu that I had to set up to where it even knew where Python 3.8 is, the menu that I knew I configured correctly because I followed every single step of that C++ tutorial correctly, it knew that I had a 64-bit machine, that my target was 64-bit, that everything was 64-bit because it's 2025. So I just copied my C code and my setup and my toml in a new directory that wasn't tainted by any of the weird stuff, just the weird things that Visual Studio makes. All the folders, all the dot whatevers, the configuration files. I don't care about that. I don't care about templates. I just don't. I hate it. I hate Visual Studio so much. It's very good for the people that need it, I'm sure. I am not one of those people. So, anyway, in the new directory that's not tainted by Visual Studio, it works. Because once again, Visual Studio could build my code. It was correct code, and I built it with pip, and it worked. Ah! It just, I don't even know what sound to make other than ah! I haven't even talked about writing actual code that does stuff. So the C++ tutorial showed you how to make a function, just a function in a C extension with Python, and they really wanted you to use like PyBind or whatever, like a library that removes a bunch of boilerplate code. I need the boilerplate because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not at the point where I can take off the training wheels with a library that makes writing C extensions pleasant. Because if I only learn how to use that library, what if like, I'm in some apocalyptic scenario where I only have a C compiler, for some reason Python, and a dream, which isn't a realistic scenario, but that's the conceit of this channel. Is like, what if we had to rewrite software, but we didn't have the internet to do it? Can we actually do it? And the answer for me is maybe. Um, so yeah, I wanted to learn how to write C extensions by hand because I think it's a good skill to have. It's not a skill a lot of people have. It's only a skill that good programmers have, that upper echelon have. And they just don't generate information in the same way that novices require information to be generated. I don't consider myself a novice at C. I know how to like manage memory safely, as long as it's not a string. I will not. Strings are not my friend. If it's not a string, I can manage that memory safely. Uh, like I know how to write C code, but I don't know the ins and outs of the Python C API. So it's just been a nightmare. And the first major project that I've worked on for this channel is I'm basically trying to recreate NumPy from scratch. So I have like a whole array library that I built in Python, which wasn't hard at all. because it's Python. Everything that you need to write is easy. Um, but I wanted to have a real point of comparison to an array object built in C that, of course, wasn't NumPy, because if I use NumPy, that's cheating. And obviously, even my own hand-crafted C extension to implement an array isn't going to be as good as NumPy, because, once again, I'm not the upper echelon of programmers that is maintaining the NumPy source code. I'm just not. Maybe one day, but I'm not that guy now. So, dealing with objects in the C API that are sequences and numbers is very difficult. Well, it's probably not difficult, but if you're looking for a tutorial on how to do that, you're not going to find it. You're not. You're going to have people that show you how to make a module that does hello world. You're going to find the tutorial in the Python C API documentation that does give you useful info on how to make methods, on how to handle memory, how to increment and decrement references for the garbage collector. And if you want to create a container, sorry, there just aren't tutorials for that. Everything that I've learned about how to handle like sequences that can use like the dunder add, the dunder whatever, is from just looking at the NumPy source code. And even then, NumPy does a lot of stuff that I just really don't know what they're doing. You know, there aren't any good like YouTube tutorials. People are writing blog posts about this because I've said this so much in this video. The people that are writing this code don't need tutorials. They don't need blog posts. They don't need Stack Overflow. They just needed the documentation and like an Adderall, and they were fine. But shit, I needed an Adderall, documentation, and a nap. Like, and a lot of Stack Overflow that just wasn't there. Also, I don't like Adderall. Dexedrine is where it's at. Anyway, that's beside the point. Amphetamine is such a double-edged sword. I should edit that out. So, yeah, I've had a miserable time writing Python C extensions. And I've been rambling for so long. By the way, just because I know this information is not on the internet, if you're using GCC on Windows, just make sure after -O on the command line, you put the name of your extension .pyd-shared, and it'll make a PYD object. You don't even need to install it with pip. It'll just work. I'm not even kidding. I wish I was. But anyway, I'm so sorry that the first video on this channel that actually talks about programming is kind of negative and saying I'm having a really bad time because I'm not that smart. But yeah, I want to change this problem. On the very mediocre WordPress blog that I have, I'm going to write a blog post that talks about like my journey with this, that will probably have some tutorials, which I'm not really even in a position to tell people this is the way to do stuff. Because, okay, in Python, in the C API, you have to do PyIncref, PyDecref, PyNewRef, PySetRef, PyClearRef, and that's because the Python garbage collector is very powerful, because Python is a language so memory safe, it's endorsed by the government. I'm not even joking. Like, there are a list of languages that the U.S. government endorses because of their memory safety. Like, you literally cannot, to my knowledge, please don't correct me, in pure Python, do common, like, memory exploits that you can in C, like a buffer overflow. You can't do it in Python. It's just that good because of the garbage collector. Because the people that wrote Python really knew what they were doing, and even though Python is written in C, you can't do the same tricks that you can to blow both your feet off, which I know a lot about. Which, this is also an aside, one of the reasons why I'm doing all of this on Windows is because Windows is incredibly sandbox. Like, people always say that Windows isn't safe, and you can get hacked with a PDF file. Um, but if you're writing C code, thankfully Microsoft included enough safeguards that you're not going to like brick your system when you inevitably forget to check array bounds and you fill up all your memory with garbage data. Which a horrifying thing about Python, and one reason why knowing the C API well is so important is because even after the Python interpreter shuts down, if you didn't actually have all of your objects that you created in the C API cleaned up, they're going to hang out in your memory, just there. Think about it. In pure Python, you can't create a life-ending memory error, but if you're using the C API, best believe you can create a memory leak so powerful that nothing can. I was going to make a joke. I'm not that smart. Anyway, you can create memory leaks real easy in the C API, which probably isn't surprising. But yeah. Anyway, stick around if you want to hear someone not that smart talk about Python and how Python is really hard to use in the context of C. The next video that I have is going to be about solving the generalized eigenvalue problem in pure Python. I'm going to be talking about the Hess method of iterative QR factorizations to kind of solve a version of the generalized eigenvalue problem. Real emphasis on aversion. I also have some code that's actually pretty fast in regular Python on how to find an inverse of a generalized matrix. It is not numerically stable, but it does work. You can find an honest-to-God inverse of almost any square matrix, but it is not numerically stable, so it can't really be any matrix, but yeah. So that will be the next video, and it is a lot happier, it is a lot more positive, and, it will actually teach you something. But anyway, goodbye for now, and thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it.